Hello, and welcome to a training on the Grants to Reduce Domestic Violence, Dating Violence, Sexual Assault, and Stalking on Campus grant program. Today we will be going over the progress reporting form all grantees must submit biannually to OVW. The first 6-month reporting period covers January 1st to June 30th, and reports are due to OVW July 30th. The second reporting period covers July 1st through December 31st, and reports are due January 30th of the following year. Thank you for accessing our recording. We hope that this training enables you to provide the most detailed and accurate reporting of your grant-funded work. Accurate data reporting is important for many reasons. Your quantitative and qualitative data enable VAWA's effectiveness to be measured. VAWA MEI creates reports for OVW using your data and data from grantees across the country. These summary data reports support OVW to make requests for increased appropriations and to defend VAWA funding to decision makers. Your data also helps OVW to make sure federal funds are being spent appropriately and to measure the performance of grant programs. Additionally, every 2 years, the Attorney General is required to submit a report to Congress on the overall effectiveness of VAWA funding. VAWA grantee data makes up a significant part of that mandated report. The more consistently grantees fill out their reports, the more accurately VAWA's effectiveness can be measured through these means. Before we go through the progress reporting form, page by page, here are a few tips for successful data reporting. Read the separate instructions you have downloaded with the progress reporting form. There are many helpful examples throughout the instructions to assist you in filling out the reporting form. Throughout this form, there are other categories listed for many questions, but please use them sparingly. We ask that you use the other category only if you can't find a way to put the information into a category that already exists and is a close fit. When we aggregate data for reports, often responses in the other category will not get included in the reports. However, there are some cases where other really is the only option to accurately capture your data. That is fine. We just ask that you take the time to rule out all other options first. Additionally, if you do not have an other to report, please leave the box blank and do not report NA, not yet, none, etc. Following most sections of the form, you will find optional narrative questions. Use these sections to talk about the unique successes of your grant-funded activities. Talk about the impact grant-funded activities have made on your community or for survivors. These questions are your opportunity to provide more detail about the work being done in each area that the hard data does not capture on its own. We ask that you try not to use acronyms or abbreviations in your data. If you do use an acronym, please provide an explanation in each question where you use the acronym. Do not send attachments or extra documents as a way to report data that is asked for in the progress reporting form. Only data that is contained in the form itself will be received and analyzed by Muskie's VAWA MEI. Finally, if you have any questions about reporting, give us at VAWA MEI a call or send us an email. We are here to help you and will happily work through any scenarios or questions you may have about your report. The first section on the form, Section A1, Grant Information, must be filled out by all grantees every reporting period. Questions 2 through 4 are pre-populated by GMS for you, but we ask that you look over those 3 questions carefully to ensure that the pre-populated data is accurate. Section A2, Staff Information, should be filled out each reporting period in which campus program funds were used to fund staff positions. When considering reporting staff, only report staff if they are either fully or partially funded by campus grant funds, including contracted work paid by campus grant funds. Report staff by activity performed rather than by job title. If staff members fall into 2 or more categories, divide their FTEs among applicable categories. Time should be prorated wherever necessary, such as when someone is part-time, was hired partway through the grant period, is a contractor, or is full-time but only partially funded by campus program funds. Report to the second decimal, i.e. 1.25 or 0.05 FTEs, and use the other category sparingly. Many activities performed by staff are included in the listed categories, but if you do use other, please be specific and in the descriptor correlate each entry with an FTE amount if you have multiple entries in the other description. All FTE calculations are based on the assumption of 40 hours worked per week for 26 weeks, or a total of 1,040 working hours in the 6-month reporting period. That is, 1.0 FTEs is equal to a staff member who is fully campus grant funded and working full-time for 40 hours a week over 26 weeks, or a total of 1,040 hours. You can use this calculation to help you figure out how to prorate FTEs. If you know the total number of hours worked in the 6-month reporting period, simply divide that number of hours by 1,040 to get the appropriate FTEs. We will walk you through a few examples to demonstrate how to make these calculations. In our example, your grant funds were used to fund one full-time victim advocate whose salary is 35% funded by the grant, and another full-time victim advocate whose salary is 45% funded by the grant. In this case, you would report only the percent of each salary that is grant funded. Therefore, the correct FTE reported under victim advocate would be 0.80 FTEs to account for 35% plus 45%. It is important to remember to report decimal amounts and not whole percents, because if you reported 80 FTEs, we would take that as 80 total victim advocates and know that there was an error in your report. Your grant also funds a full-time employee who spent 16 hours a week coordinating the program and 24 hours a week training professionals in the field and holding education events on campus. In this case, you would divide staff time by function, and the correct FTE under program coordinator would be 0.40 FTEs for 16 hours divided by the 40 total hours in a working week, and 0.60 FTEs for 24 hours divided by 40 hours in a working week under trainer-educator. As you can see, we have 0.40 reported on the program coordinator line and 0.60 reported on the trainer-educator line. Finally, your grant also funded a full-time legal advocate who was hired 3 months into the reporting period, in which case you would need to prorate the FTEs for legal advocates to reflect 3 months of the 6-month reporting period. As you can see, we have 0.50 FTEs reported under legal advocate to reflect those 3 months worked divided by the total 6 months in the reporting period. Section B, Purpose Areas. Check all purpose areas that apply to activities supported by campus program funds during the current reporting period. All grantees must complete this section every reporting period, and you should check all purpose areas that apply. If you are not sure which purpose areas apply, you should refer to your original grant proposal. If some of your purpose areas have changed since then, you can check them in this question, but keep in mind that your program specialist must approve all changes to your purpose areas. Section C1, minimum requirements, must be completed by all grantees every reporting period. This section is where you would report mandatory education of incoming students, as well as the mandatory training of campus police and security officers and disciplinary and judicial board members, which is a requirement of the campus grant. You will be reporting education events, training events, and people trained or educated with both campus funds and other funding sources. The minimum requirements section is the only place on the form where you are asked to report activities provided with non-OVW funds. We will walk you through an example. If grant funds supported 10 mandatory education events for incoming students this period, and another 3 mandatory education events for incoming students were provided with university funding, you would report 10 in question 14 in the first box, total number of prevention and education program events provided with campus program funds, and 3 in question 14 in the second box. The total number of prevention and education program events will auto-populate for you and, as you can see, reflect the total 13 events provided this current reporting period. Question 16A asks about the incoming students educated in those mandatory events. The first box in 16A asks for the total number of incoming students. In our example, of 5,075 incoming students, 3,500 students were educated with campus funds, reported in the second box in 16A, and 1,250 were educated with other funding sources, reflected in the third box in 16A. 325 students had not completed mandatory education by the end of the reporting period, reflected in the last box in question 16A. If any incoming students were not provided their mandatory prevention and education events by the end of the period, you must explain why in question 16B. Since all of these education events were mandatory and geared toward incoming students, all of the events and students above would be included in section C1, questions 14 through 17. Keep in mind, for the purposes of this form, that incoming students includes transfer students as well as freshmen. Question 18, 19, and 20 asks about mandatory training program events provided for campus police security officers and judicial disciplinary board members. Again, they are asking for the events provided with campus program funds and the number of events provided with another funding source, as well as the total trained with campus program funds and the total trained with another funding source, as well as the number not trained. Keep in mind, this is asking about the mandatory training. Section C2, Policies. Select yes at the beginning of Section C2 if campus program funds were used to develop, substantially revise, or implement policies or protocols during the current reporting period. Report only those protocols and policies on which development was completed during the current reporting period. If the policy or protocol is still in the development or revision phase, you should not report the policy protocol as implemented until the period when it is actually finished. By substantially revised, we mean that you spent a good amount of time revising the policy or protocol. Simply adding the name of another group under your underserved populations policy would not constitute as a revision. However, if you added another group and if separate protocols around how to serve the new group were included in your policy or protocol, that would be considered a policy revision to be reported in Section C2. In Section C3, Training, check yes if campus program funds were used for training events for the current reporting period. For the purposes of OVW's Progress Reporting Form, training is defined as activities for professionals or volunteers acting in the role of a professional to improve their response to victim survivors as it relates to their role in the system. Do not count general campus education events in this section, and do not count training provided to grant-funded staff, which is considered staff development. Additionally, exclude the professionals, the security officers, and judicial and disciplinary board members who are already reported in Section C1 minimum requirements, unless they partook in an additional training event. Again, we have an example to help you understand the training section. In our example, grant funds supported 10 training events for this reporting period. 4 training events were provided by other funds. However, only report the 10 provided with campus programming funds in question 28 training events provided. 150 campus and community-based professionals, including peer educators, who while volunteers are acting in the role of a professional, social service organizations, student affairs staff, and volunteers, 35 professionals attended training events provided by other funds, but in this case, you would only report the 150 professionals that attended the campus grant-provided trainings. Question 29 reflects the 65 peer educators, the 38 social service organization staff, the 42 student affairs staff, and the 5 volunteers trained in our example, for a total of 150 people trained with campus program funds. Section C4, Campus Education. Check yes if campus program funds were used for campus education during the current reporting period. Education is defined as the dissemination of general information that may increase public awareness of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. Education is the one section where campus grantees often find themselves appropriately using the other category, as there are many types of activities that really do not fit into the list in question 32, education activities. Keep in mind that these education activities in section C4 are separate from mandatory education you reported in the minimum requirement section. However, if incoming students attended an additional education event, they would be counted once in each section, campus education and minimum requirements. In our example, the grant-funded trainer, educator, and student volunteers held various campus community events and provided green dot activities to students in the classroom setting. As you can see in question 32, sexual assault, DV, and stalking are checked off under the community organizing and community events row. Green dot bystander intervention, a commonly reported activity, is entered in the other space, and sexual assault and domestic violence/dating violence are checked off for that activity. Because grant funds supported all of these activities, all applicable activities are checked off in question 32, and all people educated will be reported in question 33. A total of 2,035 various people attended these events, as reported in question 33, including academic deans, faculty and staff, residential life staff, student affairs staff, and students. In section C5, products, check yes if campus program funds were used to develop, substantially revise, or distribute products during the current reporting period. As with the policies and protocols, if you did not develop or revise a product in that period but did distribute it, you would not enter a number developed or revised. The first column in question 36 asks for the number developed or revised, which is usually 1, the title or topic of the product, the intended audience, the number used, not printed, but actually used or distributed, and if it was produced in another language, which you can identify in the Other Languages column, or you can leave blank if it was not produced in an additional language. If you did not develop or revise a product in this current period, fill out everything except for the number developed or revised. Likewise, if you simply developed it but have not distributed it yet, fill out the entire row except for the number used or distributed. In our example, 1 brochure was developed or revised, and 750 were used or distributed. Section C6, Data Collection. Check yes if campus program funds were used for data collection systems or communication systems, or for the purchase of hardware or other equipment during the current reporting period. Report the purchase of equipment only in the period that you actually purchased the equipment, and check all purposes that apply in question 38. In section C7, System and Capital Improvement, check yes if campus funds were used for system or capital improvement, but not including construction of buildings during the current reporting period. This is asking about improvements which make a broad system-wide response better, which you would report in question 39, and or capital improvements on campus in question 40. In our example, evaluation of judicial and disciplinary board was conducted, as well as language lines for victim services. Those are reported in question 39, and question 40, campus program funds were used to invest in emergency call boxes and in lighting. Moving into section D, victim services. To begin, we have a few tips when filling out the victim services section. Please keep in mind that most of the data requested in the victim services section is congressionally mandated. Congress wants to know how many of the number of victim survivors seeking services were served and how many could not be served. Provide information in this section that represents only those victim survivors served and services provided with campus program funding. If you did not provide victim services during the current reporting period, explain why in the box at the start of the victim services section. When considering reporting a victim survivor, you can consider 3 questions. What services does the victim request or accept? The victim survivor has to request or accept services before you would count them in this section. What services are you funded to provide under your grant? Only report on the grant-funded requested services you provide, not services you provide with other funding or services that you are not providing at all. Finally, is the person a primary victim of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking? A victim must be a primary victim of one of these victimizations to be served using grant funds. In question 41, there are 3 options for reporting victim survivors who are seeking services. The first row, victims served, includes all victim survivors who received all requested services that are provided by campus funds. The second row, partially served, includes victim survivors who received some, but not all, requested services that are provided by campus funds. The last row, row C, victims not served, is a count of all victims who received none of the requested services that are provided by campus funds. So, keep in mind there are a couple categories of people who are not counted at all in the victim services section or in question 41. Any victim survivors who are seeking only services not funded with your campus program grant would not be counted at all in this section. Any victim survivors who did not accept any of the grant-funded services that were offered or recommended would not be counted in this section. Finally, people who are not primary victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking would not be counted in this section. Victims reported should be an unduplicated count and should be counted only once per reporting period in question 41. However, they can be counted in each reporting period they are served. For example, a victim received crisis intervention at the beginning of the reporting period. They also came back at the end of the reporting period and requested and received counseling. They should be reported only once in question 41, and then should be counted once under each service provided in question 45. Keep in mind that you will need to report a victim under one victimization in question 41, even if they are a victim of multiple victimizations. You must determine the most appropriate category in which to report the victim, which you can do by going with how the victim self-identifies or by reporting them in the victimization category that prompted them to seek services. For example, if the victim's ex-boyfriend, who had a history of very controlling behavior, came to her dorm room and sexually assaulted her, and she came to you looking for help with a protection order, you could report the victim under either DV or SA, but you must choose only one for the purposes of question 41. The SA category may be more appropriate because it was a sexual assault that prompted her to seek services. Before we launch into an example to help you break down how to count victims, I would like to say a brief word about reporting victims partially served or not served. We find that grantees are often worried about reporting victims as partially served or not served because they fear that it will appear that they are not meeting their goals objectives or it will shed a negative light on their program. However, by reporting victims partially served or not served, grantees are helping OVW and decision and policymakers to understand the scope and burden of violence that stretches far beyond what VAWA is able to fund. OVW knows that VAWA funding is not enough to support every victim who requests services from grantees. Therefore, we want to encourage you all to carefully track and report using both the quantitative data and narrative data instances of partial or non-service. Narrative data can highlight long waiting lists for services or a full program or a lack of sufficient language services. Your more detailed data can help demonstrate the great need for additional services or resources in your community and across the country. Now, for our example, 50 victim survivors were fully served by grant-funded program staff. 2 sexual assault victim survivors were partially served. As you can see in question 41, the total line reflects 50 total victim survivors as served and 2 victim survivors as partially served. And those 2 are reported under the sexual assault victimization. These 2 sexual assault victims were partially served because they requested crisis intervention, individual counseling, and support group services. They received crisis intervention and individual counseling. However, the support group was full and they were placed on a waiting list. They remained on the waiting list for the support group services through the end of the reporting period. Therefore, they were partially served because they did not receive all of the services which they requested in the current reporting period. Moving on to question 42, this is where you would check reasons that victim survivors seeking services were not served or partially served, and as you can see, program reached capacity is checked off to reflect those 2 sexual assault victim survivors who were not able to be placed into a support group at the close of the reporting period. Question 43 asks for the demographics of victim survivors who are served or partially served. Do not report victim survivors who are not served in this demographics question. Question 44 asks for the victim survivor's relationship to offender by victimization, and is your opportunity to report multiple victimizations or multiple relationships for all victims served. You must have at least one relationship for each victim under the victimization that you reported them in question 41. However, you could count someone in both sexual assault and domestic violence dating violence, or even within domestic violence dating violence, if they had multiple offenders with different relationships, you could count them under, for example, both current or former spouse or intimate partner and current or former dating relationship. Question 45, Victim Services, asks about all of the services provided to victim survivors using campus program funds during the current reporting period. In our example, all 52 victims received crisis intervention, so you can see that 52 victims are reported in the crisis intervention line. 20 victims received individual counseling, 5 received group counseling, and 10 received both types of counseling. Because support group and counseling services share a line, Remember that you are counting the victims provided this service in question 45, not the total services provided. So you would have a total of 35 on the support group and counseling services line. "40 victims received victim survivor advocacy in our example, and 10 received legal advocacy." Question 45A asks about hotline calls that are provided with campus program funds. You report both the number of calls from victim survivors and the total number of hotline calls. Question 46 asks about the number of victim survivors reporting crimes, and it asks both about on-campus crimes and off-campus crimes, as well as who they were reported to, whether campus police and security or community law enforcement. This is asking specifically of the victim survivors who sought services provided under your campus program grant, the number who reported crimes of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and/or stalking. Question 48 asks about protection orders, and you would report the total number of temporary and/or final protection orders requested and the number granted for which campus program-funded victim services staff provided assistance to victim survivors during the current reporting period. Protection orders may also be known as restraining orders, anti-harassment orders, or no contact or stay-away orders. Section E, Campus and Community Measures. All grantees must complete this section every reporting period. Use information from your Clery Act report to provide information for the section for the entire campus or all of the campuses in your consortium. Provide the best information that is available to you. This section includes information related to SA, DV, and stalking offenses on campus or on public property that were reported to campus security personnel or local law enforcement. You can see page 20 of the special instructions for more details and definitions about how to report in Section E. As you can see, question 49 asks about the number of offenses reported for each victimization. Question 50 asks about the number of criminal offenses charged and the number of campus disciplinary or judicial board actions pursued. Question 51 asks about the dispositions of campus disciplinary or judicial board actions. And keep in mind, for question 51, not to include pending cases because they have not yet been disposed of. Question 52, optional additional information, is where you would describe any other sanctions reported in question 51, and please always detail how you arrived at the figures you're reporting in section E. That is, use question 52 to describe where these figures are from and the period it covers, because your program specialist will want to know the source, and it is widely recognized that it is not easy to obtain some of these answers. In our example, you can see we've filled out that the numbers in Section E represent the combined numbers for all universities in our consortium from June to December of 2017. We also describe in our example that in response question 51, the two sanctions entered in other for sexual assault include not permitted to serve in a leadership position in fraternity sorority and education mandate. Question 53 asks about the dispositions of criminal charges in the local jurisdiction. Please use question 52 to also describe any other sanctions that are listed in question 53. And just as in question 51, do not report any pending cases in question 53 as they have not yet been disposed of. Section F, Narrative. All grantees must fill out question 54 every time they report to OVW. All grantees also must fill out questions 55 and 56 annually on the January to June reporting form. Questions 57 and 58 are always optional. Use question 58 to provide any additional information about the submitted data, such as if you submitted 2 different reports for the same period, or you needed to provide dummy data in a particular section in order to validate the form. We at VAWA MEI use question 58 to help explain your data to us. It's your opportunity to communicate directly to us if you know there is a number that needs to be deleted or added in that you were not able to when you were submitting your progress reporting form. Narrative questions provide your opportunity to elaborate on the work you are doing with your campus funds, as well as non-funded activities that are related to your overarching goals of this project. Therefore, we encourage you to fill them out whenever you would like to describe additional activities or to provide a face to the hard data reported in the questions throughout the report. Validating your form. The final step that you must complete when filling out your progress reporting form is validation. You must go to the last page of the form and click the Validate button. The validation process will highlight any missing or incomplete information and ask whether you wish to return to that section to review or change the data. When you go through validation, you may see one of 2 warning messages. One type is a validation error message with a red X, as displayed on the left-hand side of our PowerPoint. If you receive this message with a red X, it means you are missing some of the required information. If you want to fix that error when you receive the pop-up, click Yes and it will bring you back to that exact question on the form. If not, you can click No and continue through validation to see if you have any other errors. But do note you will not be able to complete the validation process until you fix a validation error that has a red X. So you will have to address each of these issues before you can submit your report to OVW. The second type of warning is a reminder with a yellow exclamation point as displayed on the right-hand side of our PowerPoint slide. This type of message indicates that something on the form looks like it may be incorrect. You do not have to make a correction to the form to successfully validate when you get this message, but it is a good idea to check it out because it may be an entry error or a typo. If you want to review the field, click Yes and it will bring you back to that exact question on the form. If not, click No and continue with validation. After correcting or completing missing information, return to the bottom of the form and press Validate until all sections of the form are complete. Then you receive a third pop-up message, which is not a warning at all, but says Validation Success, as displayed at the bottom of our slide. At this point, your form has been successfully validated and is ready for you to submit through GMS. Another reminder when filling out your progress reporting form is to please use Muskie's VAWA MEI website for a variety of information that can help you with your progress report. The list on our slide are the products and information you can consistently find on our website of sample progress reporting forms, the special instructions that I've referenced throughout this recording, training dates and materials, those final reports to Congress, summary data reports, which are aggregated by grant program in charts and tables, and any OVW updates on reporting. We post important updates and notification letters from OVW regarding requirements for new grant programs as the progress reporting forms become available for those programs and any changes to existing grant programs. Muskie's VAWA MEI website URL is listed at the top of the slide. Finally, if you have any questions, here are a few resources who can help you. If you have questions about filling out the reporting form, please feel free to call or email Muskies VAWA MEI. If you have substantive questions and need to reach your program specialist, you can call OVW at the number above and reach your specific program specialist for your program. Finally, if you need GMS support, such as if you're having trouble submitting your report even after you have fixed your validation errors, or if you do find a mistake in the pre-populated data in Section A1 at the very beginning of the form, you can call OVW GMS support at the third number displayed on our screen. Thank you for joining us today for this recording. We hope that you find it helpful, and please feel free, like we said, to call or email if you ever have any questions. Thank you, and have